Welcome to Module 6. This module is on aviation laws and regulations. This is a very robust module, so this discussion will be slightly lengthy as I try to walk you through a lot of it, and I'll put bookmarks in the bottom of the comments section here so that you can take a look and fast forward to parts of this video that might be helpful to you. So in this module, we're going to learn about the history of aviation laws and regulations, and then we're going to compare national and international aviation regulations. Before we get into that, let's take a recap of Module 4. So this was your last writing assignment. Overall, your papers were pretty well done. Just a couple of you are still not using the template and are still a little bit off on your APA formatting. So please utilize that template and cross-check your APA formatting. Most of you guys are getting much better at writing papers, so nice work on that. There was a little bit of confusion between the NTSB and SMS. So let's talk about that real briefly. The NTSB is not a governing body, but they work in conjunction with the FAA. So what the NTSB does is they actually investigate accidents and incidences. And then what they do is after their investigations, they publish the results of their investigations, but they cannot regulate based off those regulations. They can only make recommendations, and it's up to the FAA to regulate the recommendations that are off the NTSB. Sometimes they'll just put notices out based off the NTSB findings, but other times the FAA will actually create laws, regulations based around those accidents if they deem it necessary. SMS is also not a regulation system or a regulating body. So when we get into Module 6, this week's module, we'll talk more about regulation, but this is purely based off of safety. So the safety management system is exactly that. It's a system in place to let companies and organizations and operators manage their safety practices. So what I did was I went ahead and pulled up the website for this, and we can talk about this real briefly just to make sure we clarify any questions that were out there from Module 4. So again, NTSB is not a regulating body. They can only make regulations. The FAA is what actually can create regulations based off of those recommendations from the NTSB. SMS you could think of as more as at a tactical level. So this is embedded with the companies, organizations, or operators themselves. So really what they're doing is you're creating a formalized process of managing your safety. Now, whether that's all from a one-person operator to a massive company with multiple aircraft and operators, what they're doing is they're trying to standardize the process so that there's a focus on safety when operating the aircraft. So just a real quick rundown based off of their website. It's decision-making, the management capabilities of the operator or the company, risk control devices, safety assurance programs, knowledge sharing between the regulators. So in this case, most of the times the FAA and the certificate holder. Certificate holder is just a fancy term of saying the airline or the operator or the small company that runs aircraft. And then safety promotion, and it's a safety promotion framework to really promote safety culture. So for those of us who are in the military, because I know there's a lot of military folks out here, you could really think of this as a ORM, and then also like your QA folks, your quality assurance folks. That's just a small piece of it. And then what that all does is it ties together so that the company can make informed decisions in their safety practices. So you could think of this as weekly safety bulletins. You can think of this as monthly safety trainings, heads up reports, I've seen them called. So like if there's trends that are going on in the company, that goes out to the rest of the company. Interaction between the company and industry. So in one case, an aircraft, they're finding an issue with an aircraft, so they'll reach out to the manufacturer of that aircraft so that they can really neck down exactly what the issue is and create a bulletin or some sort of operating change to make sure that we're operating safely, all the way down to the day-to-day decision making. So you could think CRM, crew resource management, between pilots, cabin crew, and then management, and then also a safety culture within management. So again, it's just keeping an eye on safety within the company in a formalized process, which they call the safety management system. So some of you kind of confused it with a regulatory body or has an equivalent to the NTSB, which it's not. It's not a federal organization, and at this time, it's mostly voluntary for many companies. For larger companies, you know that all the major airlines have safety management systems in place. So hopefully that clarified a little bit on Module 4, the role of NTSB and the safety management system. So now moving on to Module 6. This module, like we said, we're going to talk about aviation laws and regulations, and then we're going to compare national and international law regulations. So just like in the last or in Module 4, we talked about the NTSB and all of the different methods that the NTSB uses to make recommendations, and we're now going to talk about the actual regulations that regulate how we operate aircraft in aviation and how we fly these aircraft. So the next page you're going to get to is have you registered for the next course? So this is about the time you need to be talking to your counselors and getting registered for your course on the next term there. So that's just a quick little reminder. Next, we'll come up to the instructor's corner for Module 6. And this is going to give you, this is a big broad brush of some good resources, especially when it comes to writing your paper. So before we dive into this, let's talk about the assignment itself. Because this is where there's a lot of questions in previous classes that I've taught, is actually how to write this assignment, which is on aviation legislation. So in this assignment, it's your standard writing assignment. You're going to give me 2 to 3 pages of material, not including your title page or your references page, all written in APA format, which you guys are now used to. But the topic of this one is aviation legislation. Specifically, you need to research one national and one international regulation that can identify an area where regulation could be improved based on current, future, or industry changes. This confuses a lot of folks because if you just go in there and type in international aviation regulation or domestic aviation regulation, it can take you down a whole lot of paths to include a lot of lobbying and that sort of stuff, because now you're talking about laws and whatnot. So I'm going to give you guys the tools and resources to hopefully put you guys on the right path so that you're not aimlessly digging around. So next we'll go back to our modules tab here, and we'll go to some of our resources. So before the readings and resources, I went ahead and gave you my instructor's corner there for Module 6. And let's first talk about the readings and resources. So in the readings and resources, you're going to talk about the FAA and ICAO mostly, and it's just going to give you a brief history. So what these links are going to give you is a brief history on the FAA and the history of ICAO. So broad brush, FAA is the Federal Aviation Administration that's here in the United States, and they're the regulatory body in the United States regarding aviation. ICAO is not a regulatory organization per se, but it's an international council for civil aviation, essentially. So they don't necessarily trump the laws that are on the books for the FAA, but they help guide international standardization. So you can think about it when you fly from country to country, so that one set of rules is not completely separate from another set of rules. ICAO kind of helps oversight all of those rules and helps tie the regulatory bodies together so that they're operating kind of on the same sheet of music, or else it'd be very difficult to operate an aircraft from one country to another without having to go through a whole nother set of rules. So those are going to be your first two links on there. Next is going to talk about deregulation. So this is kind of diving specifically into the FAA. There was a Deregulation Act, and that was kind of the process through which FAA kind of came about, and how we decided how the United States changed how we regulate aviation in the United States. And that's a phenomenal read, because that is a huge factor as to why we do things the way we do today. So with that in mind, let's go back to my instructor's corner here with my readings and resources. So the first thing we'll do is we'll talk about ICAO and then the FAA and the differences thereof. So like I said, the FAA is here in the United States, and they're the governing body. ICAO, not necessarily a governing body, but they offer a lot of guidance to international governing bodies. So when we're talking about in your paper comparing regulations and talking about making recommendations for regulations based off of future operation, for the domestic, this FAA link right here is a great place to start, along with the Code of Federal Regulations, which we'll talk about in just a moment. For the international stuff, a great place to start is ICAO, okay? And that will give you a great place to start navigating, where you start thinking about international regulation and then how you can amend that and make it better. So remember, for this paper, I need to see a domestic regulation as well as an international regulation, and then I want to see you make recommendations as how we can adapt that to future operations. So you could think future operations, and you can be very imaginative of things you see today. So we're seeing space travel, which is actually becoming a thing now. You're seeing things such as drones and unmanned aerial systems in the forms of taxis around the cities and whatnot. And so that's all part of that in there. And that's more of a long-term future, or you can look at short-term solutions and what we're working with now. So you could think of the role of TSA and the role of security checks and all that. So be imaginative. There's a long way you can go with that. Let's go back to the FAA. So this is the FAA's website, phenomenal website, especially if you're going to be involved with aviation for the rest of your career. You can be very intimately familiar with the FAA website. So let's talk about what's on here real fast. So you have all of your different tabs here that talk about drones, pilots and airmen and all that. So the part that this is great for you to explore specifically for the paper, a great place to begin is under regulations. So I'm going to click under regulations, and you can see here, this is just going to talk about a bunch of different aspects of how the FAA regulates. So advisory circulars, let's talk about that real quick. Advisory circulars go out specific to aircraft, and not just aircraft, specific to aircraft as well as operations. So you could think about ways of doing a flight review, etc. Those are all advisory circulars, and they offer guidance specific to commonly asked questions or to clear up issues that are part of the regulations. That's all in the advisory circulars there, right there. Aviation directives or airworthiness directives are aircraft-specific directives that the FAA is mandating that you change on an aircraft. So if there's something that they found that they deem to be unsafe, and they create an AD or an airworthiness directive, which oftentimes comes from an accident or incident that was investigated by the NTSB, this is where those aircraft owners are mandated to comply with those airworthiness directives to have their aircraft be airworthy. They're not a voluntary thing, and that's where the mandate portion comes in. Talks about temporary flight restrictions, notices to airmen, and a whole bunch of different forms, regulations, rule making, handbooks, and manuals. This is a great tab here. So let's go to the handbooks and manuals real quick, and this is going to be just a slight tangent. So I will, over the handbooks and manuals, you'll notice that one of the common handbooks in this course is the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. That actually comes from this handbooks section, because the FAA publishes these handbooks to standardize the learning process and how folks are operating the airspace system. So Aerodynamics for Naval Aviators, fantastic read. For those of you who are in the aeronautical science program, many of these books will sound very familiar to you as you continue on through your degree program. Aerodynamics for Naval Aviators it talks about basic and advanced aerodynamics. Airplane Flying Handbook, airship information for if you're going to be a pilot on an airship, technical manuals. Aviation Instructor's Handbook is great if you're going to be a flight instructor. You'll be tested on that if you get a flight instructor certificate. Aviation Maintenance Technician Handbook, so if you're going to get your A&P certification for airframe and power plant, this is going to be what you're going to be tested on. And then you're going to have Balloon Flying Handbook, Glider Flying Handbook, Helicopter Instrument Flying Handbook. So like I said, this is a great place to get those full downloaded handbooks. These are also the same ones that you buy off of Amazon or download. These are the exact same handbooks, and they're in PDF form, and they're available for free because they're actually published by the FAA. Okay, so that's the handbook section there of the FAA. And then also in the FAA, you can specifically look at airport certification, pilots and airmen, air traffic, and aircraft specifically. So those are all great, fantastic resources for this module. Okay, now let's talk about kind of the meat and potatoes of the FAA, which is CFR Title 14, Chapter 1. Whew, that's a lot, right? So it's the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 14, Chapter 1. This link right here will take you to the electronic version of the Code of Federal Regulations. This Title 1, 2, 3, 4, you may have heard some of these commonly in the news and whatnot. Title 14 specifically deals with, as you can see right here, aeronautics and space. Chapter 1 is the FAA and the Department of Transportation. So remember, the FAA is the Federal Aviation Administration. They can regulate, and Department of Transportation, or DOT, can also regulate, because these are regulation-based entities, right? So each subpart is going to have different parts that are part of Chapter 1, or the FAA or the DOT. So you're going to have everything from definitions, abbreviations. Here's Part 5, safety management systems, that we already talked about. You're going to have aircraft, airmen, airspace, and then air traffic control, etc. So if you're going to get certifications within the field of aviation, you will become familiar with Title 14, Chapter 1, and probably subpart A, and then airmen and aircraft, so C and D. So let's talk about some of the specific ones that are out there, okay? So we'll go back to my instructor's corner here. Let's talk about parts 61, 91, 107, 121, 135, 141, and 142. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a quick broad brush overview of the different parts of Title 14, or CFRs, Title 14, Chapter 1. And this is going to kind of point you down that path of what regulations you specifically want to research, call out, or work with. So Part 61 is certification of airmen. So you can think about it as getting your private pilot certificate, your commercial pilot certificate, your airline transport pilot certificate. This specifically lays out the requirements to become a certified airman in an aircraft. Whichever license you get as a pilot, you will be looking at Part 61 for the requirements under Part 61. Part 91 is your general operation and flight rules. So these are speed limits, this is airspace, these are all the specific rules that are applicable to you when you're operating under Part 91. You can think of it this way: if you are a private pilot who just wants to go fly for fun, and you want to get your instrument rating, etc., you can get certified under Part 61 and operate under Part 91 and not have to worry about much of anything else, because all of that's going to be contained within those two parts. As we move on from there, Part 107 is small unmanned aircraft systems. So this is your drone thing. If you are interested in drone flying, or you've purchased one, your own one right now, you've probably seen the ads of getting Part 107 certified. So if you have a drone and you want to operate that drone and you want to get paid or use it for commercial operations or anything along those lines, you have to be certified under Part 107. And you've seen the schools online, where you just click through the slides and you can get tested at the end and get certified under Part 107. Part 107 is what explains small unmanned aircraft systems. So if you're interested in your drone license, read that subpart, Part 107. Part 121 is air carriers. So here you could think of your United, your Delta, your FedEx, your UPS, all your major air carriers that are out there. You have to be certified under Part 121. There's a whole lot more that operates under Part 121 in the Part 119s, etc., and you can look through those. But Part 121 is essentially what air carriers operate under, and then what the pilots and operators within that air carrier or that airline operates under Part 121. So Part 121 is synonymous with airlines and air carriers. Part 135 is on-demand operations. So if you go to your local airport and you see your Gulfstreams and your Learjets and all your private jets running around, your King Airs, a lot of those operate under Part 135. Now, Part 91, you can operate those aircraft under Part 91 as well. So you're probably thinking, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is something called holding out or operating commercially, okay? So Part 91, if some corporation wants to purchase a really nice aircraft and operate it just for the specific reason of transporting their personnel from point A to point B, you can operate under Part 91. But as soon as you start holding out or asking folks or saying that you offer a service, as in you offer a flight from point A to point B where folks can hire you on demand, meaning you can think of this like hailing a taxi, right? So this is not a scheduled flight. This is not a every day at 9 o'clock the flight takes off out of Phoenix and lands in LA. This is hey, I want to schedule or charter this aircraft to fly at 4 o'clock on Saturday and then come back at 9 o'clock on Sunday. Okay, so that's what Part 135 has to offer. Again, the rules and regulations are slightly different from Part 121 and Part 91 if you're operating under Part 135. Part 141 is pilot schools. So pilot schools, so I'm a flight instructor and I can help you get your pilot's license just one-on-one in an aircraft, and I can get you certified under Part 61, which will allow you to operate under Part 91. And there will be very specific rules and regulations and minimums that you have to abide by. Part 141 is your major flight schools. So Embry-Riddle, for example, is a Part 141 and parts of it can be Part 142 as well. But for the most part, it operates under Part 141, and these are specific flight schools. This is where oftentimes those schools have self-examining authority. So Part 141 you could think of as major flight schools or flight centers where pilots can go and get a plethora of ratings from that one school with multiple instructors operating under one umbrella syllabus. And then Part 142 is your training center. So this is what you could think of as where you have a massive simulator company, for example. So flight safety, for example, often operates under Part 142. This is where you're specifically getting things such as type ratings or specific types of training. That's usually more, Part 142 is usually tied to more advanced training. Okay, that's quite a bit, and that was a mouthful to talk about, but that all resides under Title 14, the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 14, Chapter 1, which is the Department of Transportation and the FAA. Okay, that's all going to be for your domestic. You could think of that, the FAA having components in other countries. So the CAA, for example, is Canada's equivalent of the FAA that operates in Canada. So what ties all of that together in the international community is ICAO, which is where we're going to visit next. So with ICAO, what ICAO does, like I said, they're a non-regulatory body, but what they do is they kind of tie all of aviation together. So this is a great place for you to kind of poke around and see exactly where you want to explore your international regulation. So you can specifically look up international regulation entities, or you can come out here to ICAO and really take a look and see what they're working on. So safety, capacity and efficiency, security, economic development, environmental protection, that's all here under the ICAO website. Also, they're starting to incorporate a lot more with drones, for example, because that is becoming much more of a thing. Okay, so here is an example of ICAO and what they're doing. So here you can look at global air navigation plans, okay, and how that's going to help or change things or what we're currently operating under. You could think of aeronautical information management, different ways they're standardizing, performance-based communication and navigation. So before, where everybody was using land-based navigation, now everybody's using satellite-based navigation. That is where all of this comes in and ties into place. So this is a great place to visit and look at ICAO. If you want more information on ICAO, when you first come to this website, I recommend that you go to About ICAO and then read exactly what they're all about. So this talks about, they're born from the Chicago Convention in 1944, 193 national governments, et cetera, and you can read exactly what they're doing. And down here, they're going to highlight the fact that they're not a global regulator. However, they have a lot of influence on global regulations. The other part you can look at over here is the resolutions. Where's it at here? That is not it. Sorry. There we go. Under global priorities. So this kind of talks about, under global priorities, their strategic objectives. So when they're talking about safety and navigation, economic impact, environmental impact, etc. And that's going to kind of give you an idea of some of the research that they're doing for the future, to help regulating bodies manage themselves. So as a recap, let's go to the assignment real quick. Again, I'll go to module 6 in the assignment. Okay, So just as a recap, after everything that we just talked about, so you have the FAA and ICAO and all the other international regulating bodies here. You're going to research one national, so think FAA, and one international regulation, so think ICAO influence of an international regulation. So you can look at ICAO specifically and then kind of follow the trail into how it influences other countries or governing bodies. But I'll tell you right now, for the paper, ICAO is sufficient when we're talking about international regulations. If you want to bring up a very specific ICAO point, I'll definitely accept that. And then you're going to identify an area where the regulation can be improved based on current or future industry changes. And the example they're going to give here is how autonomous flying taxis could change the way we travel, etc. So again, you're going to look at one national and one international regulation, and then we're going to talk about how each of those can be improved based on current, future, or industry changes. Sorry for the long video, but hopefully you're able to get a bunch of information out of that. As always, reach out if you have any questions, and I look forward to a great week.